Our program this evening, Enigmatic Qatar and its impact on the global stage, explores the outsized role of the small, natural gas-rich Gulf nation, who in the last few decades has emerged on the geopolitical stage in roles as diverse as mediating the return of Ukrainian children from Russia, acting as a mediator in the release of hostages in Gaza, creating the media network Al-Jazeera, and hosting the FIFA Men's World Cup. To frame the discussion tonight and to introduce our speakers is friend of the Vail Symposium, Greg Dobbs. In addition to his esteemed spot on our programming committee, Greg is a 3-time Emmy Award winner and a journalist of over 50 years, including 25 for ABC News. You can find his insightful reporting on Substack, and we highly recommend his book, Life in the Wrong Lane, Why Journalists Go In When Everyone Else Wants Out, which is also the title of his own Vail Symposium talk coming up later in this season on March 28th. Please join me in welcoming Greg Dobbs.
Megan, thank you, and good evening to everybody. I would guess that some of you, when you saw that the Vail Symposium was planning a program about Qatar, you thought, why? Qatar. I mean, how many of you could, be honest, how many could find the country on a map? Well, that's pretty good. Wow. And I think we're going to help those who can't. There it is. You see Riyadh, just a little south of the center. Northeast of there, there's this little peninsula sticking up from the Saudi vast lands, and that is Qatar. Some might not have taken much notice of Qatar until October 7th and thereafter, because Qatar has been right in the middle of things ever since then. They have played a role as a key middleman, as a key negotiator to get hostages out of Gaza, to get aid into Gaza, to effect a humanitarian pause in the fighting. As I say, they've been central to much of what's happened in that war. It's not the first time they've played a role like this. You might remember that Qatar hosted and served as intermediary in talks between the U.S. and the Taliban when we were withdrawing from Afghanistan. And more recently, including like this year, they were instrumental in winning the release of some Americans who were imprisoned in Iran. That's what Qatar does. They have effective relationships, not always fond relationships, but effective relationships with, for example, Hamas and Israel. Think about that. They have relationships with Iran and with the United States. Here's a picture for you. Qatar hosts the exiled leadership of Hamas. And at the same time, they host the biggest American air base in the Middle East. It almost makes your head spin, all the relationships they have with parties that wouldn't get along. There's a saying in the Middle East, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They've found out how to work through that. President Biden, periodically since the war started, has had conversations with the Emir of Qatar, who evidently has been an honest broker. The Secretary of State and the Director of the CIA have made stops in Qatar since the war started. The Secretary of Defense was there today. The Prime Minister of Qatar, it's run by an emir, but the Prime Minister, the head of government, is in Warsaw right now, working with the Director of the CIA, William Burns, to try to create another hostage prisoner release. It almost makes your head spin. And at the same time, Qatar is a principal funder of Hamas. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, how this small, gas-rich nation in the Gulf, with a population no bigger than the city of Chicago's, has become a central player, weaving its way through all the alliances and rivalries in the Middle East, and has become key to much of what's happening in the war. And we've got two guys who are just the right people to talk about it. Right next to me is Simon Henderson. Simon comes from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He is the resident expert there on a number of things, including Qatar. He first got involved with the Middle East, we talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago, as a journalist, a high profession in my opinion. He's British, so he worked for the Financial Times, he worked for the BBC. In fact, in our telephone conversation, just parenthetically, we discovered that both of us reported from Iran at the very same time during the revolution and then subsequently during the American hostage crisis. But his claim to fame as a Brit is that he went to school in Scotland at a place called Gordonston. And I think we're going to show you a picture of him with one of his classmates. There you go. Whose pesky mother occasionally came to visit. In case you can't see it, it's a guy named Chuck and a woman named Elizabeth. At the far left, as you're facing the stage, is our other expert on Qatar. And this is Douglas A. Smith, the former Assistant Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, who for many years engaged on security issues with diplomats and officials from Qatar, and is the former chair of the Qatar America Institute for Culture. He's not in Washington anymore. He lives a little bit up the road in West Vail. And as a matter of fact, for those of you who ski, he has worked on the mountain as a member of the unit called Special Ops, which is a conjunct to a unit with which I work, which is Ski Patrol Mountain Hosts. His claim to fame is that he has shared the pride of an Oscar because he performed an instrumental function in completing the movie from Iran called Argo. How many saw Argo? Well, there you go. So now I'm going to join these other two guys in blue blazers and talk about Qatar. Let me begin with this question, Simon and Douglas. I'm probably not alone here thinking if I were looking to figure out who's going to be the middleman, the negotiator in this conflict, I would expect one of the Gulf countries like the UAE or Saudi Arabia. They seem to pack more power and punch on the world stage, or maybe a traditional leader like Egypt. But it's Qatar that's in the middle of it. How did that happen?
I'll start.
Good.
And it's strange, and my answer will be refined if I came back in 4 weeks' time, because I'm constantly looking at the issue. But Qatar is as you can see on the map, one of the smaller countries in the Middle East, and it has a very small population, just 300,000 citizens, and 1 million or 2 worth of foreign expatriates who come to do, frankly, all the hard work. It is also has the world's 3rd largest reserves of natural gas. The 1st and 2nd positions are taken up by Russia and Iran. They vie for the top position. It depends how you calculate an esoteric aspect of natural gas reserves.
But they're very rich.
So the bottom line is they are not only rich, they are very rich. And because they're in the Middle East, they're also very vulnerable because they're surrounded by people who aren't as rich as they are, and it's a tough neighborhood. Iran immediately to the north, Saudi Arabia to the south, which tried to orchestrate a coup 25 years ago, the UAE to the east, which also tried to organize a coup in Qatar more recently. And so they play a balance of power game. They try to be friends with everybody, but allow everybody to realize you're not quite our best friend, so treat us delicately. So in the case of Iran, the most obvious nasty around them, they in fact share the same natural gas field offshore in the middle of the Gulf. If you're going to share a gas field, we would all here not want to share it with Iran. The other dangerous aspect of this is that Qatar's development of the gas field has been faster and more advanced than Iran's development of the gas field. So this gas field is a milkshake, and there are two straws in this milkshake, and Qatar is taking more than what Iran probably thinks is fair. So it has to play that card carefully, and it does that, as you indicated in your introduction, by hosting the largest military facility for US forces in the region. And so Iran thinks, hell, they're protected by the US, even though the US is thinking, hell, we don't really want to be here so much if they're being slightly friendly with Iran. So they're playing that game, and they've taken it to a second level, which is by trying to engage with everybody, not necessarily as friends, but as players. So people think, well, maybe we can talk with them, and maybe they can share our ideas with people that we don't want to talk with, and maybe we can try and meet halfway in order to sort out problems. That, in essence, is what Qatar tries to do. Everything beyond that could well be additional accurate information, but there are nuances there as well.
Douglas, you've been involved with the Middle East, not just Qatar, for many, many years, and security issues in particular. Is that their worldview? We want to get along with everybody?
I think if you were to do a generalization, yes, but I just want to put a couple fine points on it and start with Iran. I mean, to be very clear, the Qataris are very suspicious of Iran. They are incredibly wary of the fact, if you picture the Qataris live in East Vail and the Iranians are an eagle, there's not a lot of distance between them. So they have always been very conscious as if Iran wanted to rain terror down upon them, even with our base there, it's something you have to be concerned about. The issues that the Qataris are so passionate about start with education. And I think that's the thing that bonds them to the people of Iran, not to the political leadership, but to the people. And I think that's where they look for common boundaries. I mean, it's where they, yes, 25 years ago, the Saudis tried to invade. Actually, interesting little bit of tidbit there. Most recent blockade 4 years ago or so, Secretary Tillerson was Secretary of State. The Chief of Staff was General Mattis. 25 years ago, Secretary Tillerson was working in Qatar for ExxonMobil, and General Mattis was a colonel serving in Qatar, and they helped stop the invasion 25 years ago. So this linkage to the US military and protecting them goes way back. I think the way the Qataris view kind of their position in the world is kind of like the Switzerland of the Gulf. Switzerland has been able to maintain this sort of above the fray for many years, through World War II, through all sorts of world banking crises, etc. And it's how the Qataris approach how they deal with in a tribal culture, and it's an important thing to remember. It's brothers fight, brothers get back together. Brothers fight, they get back together. Many years ago, and you would know this better than I, there was talk where Qatar was going to be yet another one of the Emirates. And at the last second, they pulled the rug out and said, yeah, no, we're going to have our own independence. And the Emiratis never forgave them for that. Interestingly, from the tribes, they're much closer to the Saudis than to any other tribe. And when the most recent blockade happened, that was probably the thing that upset the Qataris the most. Because tremendous amount of trade going between the border checkpoint there. And I think they were quite taken aback, and unfortunately it was a young up-and-coming ruler in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who was kind of taken for a ride by the older, kind of his sort of leader, if you will, from the UAE. And I think they took a lot of lessons out of the most recent blockade, and it's what's kind of propelled them. I went there, I don't know if you all remember, maybe about 12 years ago or so this Christmas, the underwear bomber. So I was, as my family remembers, I was at our family's place in Florida, and all of my phones started ringing. And I thought it was just a stupid drill. And my phone rang, my other phone, my classified BlackBerry rang. And the next thing, my family didn't see me for the next 2 weeks because I was whisked away as we tried to figure out how to counter this threat. And that's when the Qataris really stood up, because we were dealing with an imminent threat to ground global aviation, and we had no idea how to stop it. This kind of non-metallic attack, and we went there, and it is from that moment on that I sort of grew this sort of love of how clever they are. I mean, the literacy rate in Qatar is 99% or so. I mean, it blows America away. I mean, their fascination with history, with learning about the way the world has happened, is what has put them in this position today to be such a global leader and to lead in trying to lower the temperature. And if you are to meet the Emir, he is unbelievably charismatic, charming, non-confrontational, and he just wants peace in his neighborhood. Like, he just wants to get along to go along. He wants to play tennis and have people get along.
And would you guys say that separates them, makes them distinctive as apart from the Saudis and the Emiratis in the same neighborhood?
If you mean, is there always going to be tension between Qatar and its neighbors, the answer is probably yes. As Douglas suggested, the UAE is a particular challenge. Bahrain, which ironically is the place where oil was first discovered in the Southern Gulf, turns out to be one of the few places in the Southern Gulf which doesn't have much oil at all. And so Bahrain is immensely resentful of Qatar's good fortune in having so much natural gas. And so this sort of tension is going to remain. I'm not sure on the Saudi aspect how that is going to play. Before MBS saw good sense on deciding to end the rift with Qatar and force the other parts, Bahrain, the UAE, to join him in ending the rift, the Saudi plans for a Chinese nuclear power station were to have it on the border with Qatar, which is, Saudi Arabia, as you can see on the map, is rather large. If you decide to put a nuclear power station directly next door, it's not considered a particularly friendly act.
I wouldn't like it myself. By the way, you said 12 years ago, and then you said on your BlackBerry. You didn't have to say 12 years ago. I just had to note that. Let's talk about them as an intermediary. Not just with respect to the issues with the current war, but with the Taliban in the U.S., with the release of hostages from Iran. And they've been involved with a few hostages truly. They've been involved in other operations like that. Are they more than just a party that carries one side's ideas into the other room? I mean, are they the thinkers behind some of the solutions, some of the compromises, some of the effective decisions that are taken?
I think a little of both. I think a lot of their power comes from the fact that they're deeply respectful. They don't just carry the U.S.'s water and go to Iran and say, this is what you need to do, and vice versa. I think they are a fair conveyor of both sides' views. The current prime minister, as well as the foreign minister, Sheikh Mohammed, is 36 years old, 37 years old. He is unbelievably well educated. I mean, he is as close to the Emir as anyone in the royal family. And he is, in the words of sort of Teddy Roosevelt, to walk quietly but carry a big stick. He is does not believe in drama, and I think it's one of the single biggest reasons they've been so effective in helping us as we came out of Afghanistan, this current crisis, is that he is very frank behind the scenes, very honest and respectful behind the scenes. The Qataris don't believe in drama, and I think it is what is proven to be, their secret weapon and why they've been so effective is they do hold, a lot of times they'd be better off to go out on the national media and really say what they think and why they're not being treated right, but it's not their style. Their style has been to maneuver quietly behind the scenes to try to achieve those end results. And I think it's why Secretary Blinken and others have so relied on Sheikh Mohammed through this whole crisis, is he is truly an honest broker. I think, having just come back from there, you can imagine the crisis going on in the Gulf right now is on the tip of everybody's tongue, and everyone definitely has a view on it. And I think the Qataris definitely, lean towards, the plight of the Palestinians, and don't, we mustn't forget that the majority of the Palestinians are peaceful, loving people living in a horrible situation. But Sheikh Mohammed has been very careful to kind of keep his views and sort of the Emir's views, to the side. And what they are fighting for is how do we become honest brokers to bring the parties together. And these are some large personalities. I mean, the Prime Minister of Israel is we had a leader in this country with a personality like that. He's not an easy customer to deal with, and somehow the Qataris are doing the best they can to keep him in that box. Now, we'll see how we progress, but...
Simon, what do they get out of this? What do they get out of having a place at the table? In fact, they provide the table. And are there any risks for them playing this role, having their hands extended to all parties?
Well, there's certainly a risk which has been demonstrated in the current crisis, which, in date terms, started on October 7th when Hamas launched attacks from Gaza into Israel. And the risk is that even they can misunderstand the situation. And it's my analysis, and at this stage it's probably, I'm well aware that I can't be completely definitive, that the Qatari role in, over the years, looking after the people of Gaza and making sure that they have food and that the contact with Israel facilitates all sorts of support, has been, the Qataris have been played by Hamas on this. In journalistic terms, the headline has often been, Qatar has supported Hamas. I think that was a misnomer. Qatar supported the people of Gaza and facilitated, in order to facilitate us supporting the people of Gaza, they had to work with Hamas. But I once met and interviewed, and I think I sent you a copy of the interview, the Qatari envoy who worked with Gaza, and I think he's still the envoy, a man called Mohammed Al-Ahmadi, who I had interviewed when I was in Doha visiting. And the first question I asked him after he had decided that he was prepared to be interviewed was, you're perceived as supporting Hamas in Gaza because of your work there. And he said, that's, and then BS, except he said it out. It was one of those write-ups for the interview I had to put some dots in.
But it's nice to know that American culture pervades theirs as well.
Yes, so I think the Qataris are embarrassed almost on the same level as the Israeli government for misunderstanding what Hamas was up to when both Qatar and Israel thought that although the situation in Gaza wasn't particularly good, it was at least stable and was calm and would stay that way. And I think the lesson of that is, A, they were wrong, and B, even in circumstances, particularly in the Middle East, but probably other parts of the world as well, where you have a stable, what you think is a stable situation, think of the reasons why it might not be stable, and then argue to yourself, how long is that stability going to last? And in Gaza, people made wrong calculations.
From what you said, would that explain why Hamas, on its side of this whole conflict, has put its trust in Qatar in some of these negotiations about hostages, about aid, and so forth?
I don't think they've put their trust. They have no choice. I mean, to be perfectly frank, I think what you said, I would just put an exclamation point on it. I mean, the Qataris are horrified by what Hamas did. It's one of the things, and the Qataris have never sort of pushed back on this narrative. And the true narrative is, through 3 presidents, U.S. presidents, they have hosted Hamas. It is at the direct request of the United States government that Hamas team has been there. The Qataris paid for it, but it's been through 3 presidents now that we have, perhaps you can even say 4 presidents are there. I mean, just coming back from there, the Qataris are mortified by the attack. They feel betrayed that they were trying to sort of keep the peace. And the most important thing in the narrative that gets lost is the money that the Qataris have sent to quote-unquote Hamas. Picture Hamas as sort of the mayor, if you will, running the operations within Gaza. And that money and where it goes within Gaza is directed by the Israeli government. So this sort of vision that the Qataris are sneaking suitcases of cash across the border is just ridiculous. The money has been directed. It was requested, the Israelis and the UN High Commission on Refugees approves the expenditure of the cash. And the Qataris are not happy. To be clear, they are not happy with the situation in Gaza and what normal humanitarian would be. But they're furious. And I think Hamas knows they went too far. They're not going to say that. They believe they're fighting their just war. But they have lost the complete faith of the Qatari royal family, the Qatari government, to be honest brokers in all this. So, no, I don't think they're not doing them a favor. They have no choice, and the only reason they're still there is that that the Qataris are keeping their feet to the fire to try to resolve the situation.
But there's always a but in life. If the Qataris are supporting the welfare of the Palestinian people in Gaza, and parenthetically, that's them replacing the Palestinian Authority, where the corruption was so deep that money from European donors, from the United States, from Gulf oil-rich nations, that was meant to go into Gaza instead went into Mercedes and Audis and BMWs in the West Bank. I mean, I've seen parking lots with more fancy German cars in Ramallah, the capital of the West Bank, than I've ever seen in any parking lot in Germany. So they replaced them. That said, why were they, according to news reports just in the last couple of weeks, and some of you probably read them as well, why were they carrying cash by the millions, by the tens of millions in suitcases into Gaza? Why was it being done that way? Which sounds nefarious.
Can I just jump in there for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because I would just call that a fake news narrative. It's just not the case. I mean, 2 points on that. And I'm not here to defend, the Qataris. I'm here to sort of defend the truth of the region. Point number 1 is the Palestinians picked Hamas to be their leaders, not the Qataris. And the Qataris merely supported a freely elected government. It doesn't have to be a government they liked. But the Palestinians picked Hamas. It's not been helpful to the Qataris. In terms of how bills are being paid, I mean, the reality is they're not, most of the bills, the energy bills and stuff like that is more of a direct deposit, if you will. Currency is part of the equation there, but the notion that in the dark of night, Qatari envoys are bringing hidden suitcases. The currency being distributed within the region to pay for diapers, medicines, etc. The UN High Commission on Refugees and the Israelis play a massive role in directing where that goes. So I think I sometimes get mad at my Qatari friends. They don't punch back harder on trying to create the narrative that's actually happening. It's just not their style. I mean, they're just more about getting the job done. I mean, they're not looking to pick fights. They just want to find solutions. Sorry.
And on the suitcase notion, Gaza is a cash economy. I don't think credit cards work. And so to support the people of Gaza, you have to distribute cash. And that is what's in the suitcases. And the Qatari envoy, Mr. Al-Ahmadi, explained to me, and I think it's slightly refined since, but this was 5 years ago, that he was flying into Amman, Jordan, with suitcases of cash, which might even have been, some of it was dollars, but some of it was Israeli cash, which is still valid in Gaza, believe it or not. And he was then driving into Israel. He stayed in Jerusalem, told me the hotel he used to stay in, stayed in Western Jerusalem, i.e. Jewish Jerusalem, and had meetings with Israeli officials. He was a tremendous names dropper and told me who he used to meet and whether he liked him or not. And then drove on to Gaza, which is probably a 2 or 3 hour drive from Jerusalem. And he said to me, would you like to come with me the next time I go? And I thought quickly on this, and you won't be surprised to hear that I said, thanks for the invitation, but perhaps not. I'm sure he would have said, you have my protection, but I wasn't quite sure how good his protection was, and I didn't think my wife would wanted it to be tested. So I'm still here tonight. So, that's how the mechanics of it worked. And although a French diplomat said to me last week that he thinks it's changed slightly, but wasn't quite sure how it had changed. You know, the Israelis were endorsing the system, counting the cash before it went in. It was a highly supervised transaction.
One of you, actually I think it was something you wrote, Simon, something I read about, and it might have been part of that story you just told, about a decades-long relationship between Qatar and Israel, not always completely under the radar. I mean, you know, the title of this program is The Enigmatic Qatar. I mean, that would define it if, in fact, they, in a region where Israel has been evil in the minds of most people, including leaders of government, and Qatar was not completely hiding its relationship with high officials in Israel. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. I've got a small anecdote and then a bit of a description there. The anecdote is that my best Qatari contact, who is a senior member of the Thani ruling family, I first met him via an Israeli diplomat a long time ago. I'll leave it like that because, in fact, no, I'll just leave it like that. But the demonstrable event where people suddenly thought, hell, there's something going on between Qatar and Israel, is in 1995, two relevant things happened. One was that Hamad, who is the father of the current emir, took over from his own father, who was in a clinic in Switzerland. And I can share it with you because he drank too much. And Hamad got fed up with this, and at one point when father was still in Switzerland, he pushed him to one side and took over power. Later that year, a few months later, Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel, was assassinated, and he was buried in Jerusalem. At the funeral in Jerusalem, there was a Qatari who was the Minister of Information, but wearing full Arab dress. And I suspect he had been told to maintain a low profile when he was in Jerusalem, but he failed to understand that wretched things called press photographers are out there to capture such pictures. But the picture was caught. And at that point, people realized that Qatar and Israel were developing a relationship. And the following year, Shimon Peres, who was the new Prime Minister of Israel, went to Doha on a visit, and after which Israel set up what was euphemistically called a trade office in Doha, but realistically it was an unofficial embassy.
Because has anybody here ever been in Doha? Oh, quite a few, half a dozen or so. I haven't. I've been in virtually every country in the Islamic world, from Morocco to Pakistan, but not Doha. So what's it like there, just culturally? You know, in Dubai, you can get a Mai Tai. Don't try in Saudi Arabia.
You can get them in Saudi now.
What's it like there, just in terms of openness, in terms of autocracy, in terms of social liberalism, and so forth?
Actually, I'm really excited to talk about that. I just want to make two anecdotal comments on the Israel front that people don't realize, that Israelis travel visa-free to Doha. You don't need so they, now visas are becoming a little like, Americans need, I was just there and I need a visa. Now you get it on arrival, but Israelis were able to travel visa-free. But just
with Israeli passports.
Yeah, passport. But anecdotally, I was lucky enough to go to the World Cup, which was beyond spectacular. I don't think anyone will ever top what they were able to do. And a friend of mine who had been in the Mossad but retired was our guest and was welcomed with open. The first day she was nervous, but very quickly went off on her own, went to go see the museums and such like that, which kind of speaks to this question you asked, is what is it like? It's wonderful. I mean, you are safer in Doha than you are in this church right now. There is a zero tolerance for crime, and some would say that means a lack of certain liberties, but you don't notice those things. They are an unbelievably familial society. I mean, for me, having gone there so much now, it's being invited to their houses for dinner. It's an incredibly open society. It is deeply religious, but in a very respectful sort of way. It's not like the pictures you would see out of the movie. Every once in a while, you'll see women truly in the traditional dress. The vast majority are, they wear the scarf and they're modest, but they're wearing Manolo Blahniks or, the fanciest shoes you can imagine. The hotels are beyond spectacular. All the Western hotels do serve alcohol. You don't see Qataris in there drinking. It's journalists and finance guys hanging out at the bars having fun, but it's a culture rich for such a young country. They are passionate about education, about museums. The museums there are absolutely spectacular, both the content within them, but also the architecture of how they've built them. They're absolutely magnificent. So you absolutely have to go. I encourage everyone to visit it. It is a warm and welcoming place, and the Qataris are unbelievably proud of what they've been able to build in the last 30 years.
An anecdote which follows on directly from that is that if you're flying to Qatar and you go on Qatar Airways and you're fortunate enough to go business class, as soon as you get into your seat, you're handed not only a menu, but also the wine list. And it's a wine list
and it's
to
spectacular.
die for. Yeah. And you think to yourself, isn't Qatar Islamic? Isn't it seriously Islamic? Perhaps. Doesn't it work with Hamas? You know, and you're looking at a wine list. And I'm not trying to, the country has faults. You know, I'm not trying to excuse that. But in terms of intellectually, hell, I've got to think about this before I make instant judgments. It's an interesting exercise.
Before we move too far away from a comment you made maybe 10 minutes ago, Simon, about what the royal family, you brought a visual aid, and I just found it fascinating. This is basically a family tree, is it not?
This is.
How about you hold one end, I'll hold the other, and then he'll
This is
talk.
Vanna White here.
This is a family tree of the Al-Thani. Not every
Can you read that for
Al-Thani
me?
is here because there are too many for it, which in itself is important to know because it means lots of people want a slice of the cake. These are the important Al-Thani, the ones who either have important jobs now or their dad had an important job. I say their dad because unfortunately it's a male-dominated family tree. There are women on it, for example, Amir Tamim's mother is Sheikha Moza, who's considered a major force in her own right. But this is an illustration of if you're going to study Qatar, and I hope one or two of you after this evening might want to take greater interest, you've got to get your head across this, or at least be aware of it. It comes from a friend of mine called Michael Field, who I used to be a colleague of mine on the Financial Times in London, and developed an interest in Gulf family trees and produces these things at great expense. Fortunately, because I work for a not-for-profit think tank, we get a concessionary rate on the great expense.
But bottom line, so what do we take from this?
But there is a detailed history to Qatar, and we might only, even if we're experts on it, and we had to write down names of the people who are important, after 10 or 12 or something, we might be running out of inspiration or memory. But the Qataris themselves and the Al-Thani know all of this. They take it into account. They know who was a good guy, who was a less than successful guy, and why they were important or not. And they also know, in terms of foreign relations, who insulted them and when from one of their neighboring countries, and whether the insult is living on or has been allowed to die. I have to tell you, the insult lives on.
I think the other interesting thing, my 17-year-old daughter, who's supposed to be home studying for exams, but is potentially watching, so I should bring up the point that while it is a male-dominated society, some of those powerful people in the country are women. The Emir's mother, his sister, the spokesperson, longtime spokesperson for the government was a woman. So while Saudi Arabia is working to try to catch up, it's one of the reasons that some of their neighbors are pissed at them, is that women had full rights in the country. Women get divorced in Qatar. So it's one of the things that when the blockade happened 4 or 5 years ago, it was definitely one of the reasons, is that they were too progressive for many of their neighbors. I think the UAE, to your point, and even though this isn't a program about the UAE, is divided into sort of two camps. there's Dubai, which I used to call it Vegas, in the desert without gambling, but gambling's coming. MGM is opening a casino there. Dubai, they have no money for the most part. Abu Dhabi is where the oil is, where the power is, much more conservative than Dubai. Dubai is definitely, if you're trying to find a missing Russian, they're in Dubai right now. I was just there. You don't hear English, you hear Russian everywhere. But it speaks to sort of the challenges that the Qataris have had and kind of how they view it. The society there is more conservative, open and accepting, but a gentle class to it. I would call it sort of more of a southern class versus brash New York.
When you mentioned Dubai, I guess I first mentioned it. I can only parenthetically tell the story of having skied in Dubai. Some of you might know that. You can ski at the Mall of the Emirates, I think it's called.
And I found out you're not supposed to pet the penguins. So if you go there, don't touch the penguins. They don't like that. So.
But this is, there was an old ad for the Oldsmobile. This is not your grandfather's Oldsmobile. And Qatar and Dubai and to a slightly lesser degree, Abu Dhabi are not your grandfather's Gulf nations.
Qatar has their most prestigious place to visit in Doha is the Islamic Museum, which is visually extraordinary in a beautiful location and interesting to go round. It tells you a lot when Dubai, apart from the ski slope, the indoor ski slope, which I've also been on, and I have the gloves Ski Dubai to show it, has the world's tallest building.
Right, the Burj Al Dubai.
Yeah, so it's a different idea of what's important in life, I think.
My wife asked me a question, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know the answer, but you guys obviously will. Is the ruling family and the general citizen population Sunni or Shia?
Sunni.
Sunni in Qatar.
So they are in sync with their neighbors other than Iran.
They are very similar to Saudi Arabia. They have the same sort of Sunniism, bad word, but it will do here, as Saudi Arabia. They also have a small, apart from lots of expatriates who don't count in this calculation, in terms of citizens, they do have a few Shia citizens.
Maybe 10%.
Yeah. They're for historical reasons, probably relating to trading relations going back centuries.
If Qatar had not become the central middle man in the conflict right now in Gaza, who else would have moved in there? Who else could have moved in there? You both have talked about their worldview. We want to get along with everybody. I don't know that other nations in the region have the same philosophy about getting along in the world. I mean, who else could it be? Who else could succeed like the Qataris so far seem to be succeeding?
I don't think anyone in the current environment. I think there's a lot of distrust. The Saudis have worked really hard to establish these relationships with Israel. Some believe that one of the reasons Hamas did this is that they were days away from furthering that normalization between the relationships. The only possible could possibly have been the Kuwaitis. The Kuwaitis have, particularly since the invasion, have tried to stay above the fray. They're a little kind of off by themselves. They kind of abut onto Iraq, as we all know. So if there was to be one group, I don't know, your thoughts? In the Arab world, that's the only one I could think of that possibly could have played that role.
I would give a slightly different take. I don't think there's anything else in the Middle East. Qatar has a similar role to Switzerland, arguably, although even the Swiss are becoming less neutral than they have been. But historically, we can be you can meet here, we can discuss, etc. The Kuwait is an interesting argument to pose. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the Palestinians who lived in Kuwait rather welcomed the Iraqis, and so when Kuwait was liberated, the returning emir and the rest of the Kuwaiti leadership were rather irritated by the Palestinians' display of disloyalty, and so summarily expelled them, 400,000, and most of which went to Jordan. Perhaps the other possibility is Oman, which is, as you can see on the map, or on a map, Oman is, in a sense, just outside the Gulf.
Yeah.
And so, although it's a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council of those conservative 6 Arab countries, is a sort of outside member and doesn't join in completely, plays a cautious game.
Yeah, they stayed neutral during the blockade. They stayed out of it. But they're also going through transition as well. I mean, the longtime sultan died 18 months ago or so. And so, they're an amazing country, but I think so the political leadership there hasn't solidified to be tough enough to play that big of a role, and nor do they have kind of the war chest, as you opened your discussion tonight, that the Qataris do. And it's a cliche, but money talks, and it's one of the big reasons they've been able to have so much power.
It's a cliche, but it's a reality. Here's a question that derives from what you both have said about the Qatari worldview, that we want to try to get along with everybody. We know that in the end of the 1970s, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat shook hands, and there was a peace treaty that has held all these years, remarkably in a way, between Egypt and Israel. Jordan followed not too long thereafter. More recently, the Abraham Accords, and Bahrain, and I think the UAE and Morocco maybe still have made peace with Israel. And Saudi Arabia was on the verge of a big leap in its relationship with Israel. Why not Qatar? If this is a nation that wants to be a part of everybody's community, why hadn't they extended, particularly in view of their long history with Israel, why didn't they
Gaza
create a relationship?
I mean, it's one word, Gaza. I mean, they're humanitarians, and they feel the plight of the. It's not a political position they're taking. They are taking a humanitarian position on how they view 2 million plus people. What are there? 47,000 people in the Vail Valley. So imagine 2 million plus, and so instead of what we have here, that would be how many people would be living where we are right now. And I think that is the single issue, and it's not, they're not taking it, to be clear, this is not a political position. They are taking a humanitarian position on how 2 million plus people they feel are being treated by Israel.
And I think the Palestinian issue was a wrinkle which was holding back or delaying a Saudi-Israeli relationship, open relationship, because they just wanted to show some influence rather than what the Israelis essentially wanted them to do, which was to show contempt towards Palestinian nationalism. And the Saudis weren't prepared to do that.
In the middle to long term, I'm going to ask you both to project a little bit into the future, but they will be educated guesses at the very least. And it involves the Saudi-Israeli budding partnership. Will it be brought back to the table in view of what's going on right now? The Saudis have been very harsh in their assessments of Israeli tactics in Gaza.
It's too early to say, and I regret to say, too early to have a serious discussion on the issue while what is happening in Gaza isn't yet resolved.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, Mohammed bin Salman got off to a rough start on a couple of fronts. I think he has quickly learned his lesson, and it's interesting when you talk to real Saudi insiders. He's a listener. The reason he's in this position right now is he was always there. He was always attentive. He was not meant to take on this new role, but he was always there listening to his father. And I think, he sees big things for this country. And remember, Saudi Arabia is 80-some million people. Compared to tiny little, Qatar. The notion of trying to, it was very much by design, particularly around the tech sector, that he was so intrigued by creating this bigger partnership. But when it's all said and done, I mean, it is very much a tribal society. And, I think the tribes are pissed at the moment. They are not happy with what is going on, and I think it's going to take some time for that dust to settle.
Okay, I think it's time to invite you to ask questions. James has the roving microphone. I'm going to tell them, or you can tell them, when you have that microphone, hold it like he's holding it. The crude way of putting it, you're about to shove a hot dog down your throat. That's the way the sound will carry.
I'll also ask you to stand if you're able, and you can have a little bit of context tonight. We've got good time, but limit our storytelling. And we will go back and forth to the online audience as well. So folks online, use the Q&A feature in the Zoom window, and we'll start right here.
Thank you for coming. I have two questions, an easy one and a harder one. The easy question is, how do you pronounce the name of the country, and where does the name come from?
Sorry,
How do you pronounce the name of the country, and what else?
What is the origin of the name Qatar?
The origin of the name of the country.
Qatar is how you pronounce it. But I'm glad you care how you pronounce it. I've always regarded one of the freedoms of the United States as being the ability to mispronounce foreign names.
Does anybody here say I'm going on vacation to Qatari?
And the Qataris are sufficiently polite that although they may be horrified by your pronunciation, their groan will be inward rather than showing it.
The second question I had...
Excuse me, you also asked about the origin of the transliterated five-letter name Qatar. Do you know where it comes from? Stump the band.
At the National Museum, they talk all about it. I don't know. My wife's here tonight. I don't know if you remember when I took you there. They explain where I can't remember. I've left Washington, so I'm not going to get into the make something up.
My response to that is I don't speak Arabic. I speak barrels of oil. That's my expertise. And since having to learn about Qatar, I've had to become an expert in volumes of natural gas as well. Those are my headaches. For my own satisfaction, I will look up what the answer is, but okay.
James made us silence our phones so we can't check the Google machine to see that.
Okay, so you had the hard question.
But now I got to ask you what I thought was the hard question. So the U.S. Department of Education recently published the top recipients of Qatar funding to U.S. universities, and the top 10 schools received in a 5-year period over $1.2 billion. Top of the list, Georgetown at $332 million, Northwestern at $277 million, and I'll leave it at that. As a U.S. citizen, what's going on there? Should I be worried that a foreign government is providing $1 billion to our local universities, or should I just say thank you?
All right, I'll take that one. You should say thank you. Numbers, numbers is my new life, and the trick is to read what the numbers actually are. So what the majority of that money pays for is, in basically center Doha, there's something called Education City, which is a huge plot of land. They have a full-size football stadium, equestrian. They also have the Georgetown campus, the Northwestern campus, Cornell Medical School, Texas A&M Engineering, Virginia Commonwealth Fashion, I think. I'm forgetting one, forgive me. So the big bucket of that money was the Qataris paid the hard costs, so they paid for the construction costs, but the education that is being provided is the US curriculum. So if you graduate from the Georgetown School in Doha, it is as if you went to Georgetown in Washington, D.C. If you get a Cornell medical degree from the medical school there, it is as if you were in Ithaca, New York, a little bit hotter. And so that's where those numbers get a little deceiving. The Qataris, the actual running of the schools is overseen by the U.S. institution. It costs a lot of money to build the buildings. They are not directing the curriculum. Is there an element there? Yes, there is. One of the big reasons the Qataris put so much money into that is a little bit to your earlier question, is sort of the culture. A Qatari father was not going to send his 16, 17, 18-year-old daughter off to an American school, but wanted his daughter to get the same level of education that my daughter will be able to get anywhere in this country. And so that's kind of a great misnomer on it. They're not, as some of the reports are, that they are paying for particular professors. No, I mean, the huge part of that cost was the hard cost to allow them to bring U.S. education there, which, to my point, we should say thank you, because we are allowing a whole other part of the world to get the level of education that our kids are able to get here.
So for clarification, at least for me, Northwestern and Georgetown,
Journalism.
Cornell and others.
Is the school of Northwestern.
Well, yes. So these figures pertain, at least primarily, if not exclusively, to their support of Northwestern's Qatar extension,
yes,
and Cornell's Qatar extension, and so forth. Interesting.
I agree with that. I suspect there is more money than I personally would be happy with coming to schools here, and one wonders what the money is used for. And I think, but I haven't looked into it, but my either journalistic instinct or my naturally suspicious mind is that at the very least, Qatar is competing with other countries which are also funding American colleges, and this is a sort of game that we should have a point of view on, and maybe we're not because we're too grateful for the check.
Okay, another question?
All right, so our online audience is on it as opposed to, and we also have some other theories as to the etymology of Qatar. So Lindsay says the name Qatar comes from the word Qatara, which is thought to refer to the ancient city of Zubarah. Zubarah was a major trade port in the region. The first known mention of the word Qatar was on a map by Ptolemy that indicated the country's location. The name Qatara, C-A-T-A-R-A, was used until the 18th century, when K-A-T-A-R-A became the most common spelling. The country's name has also gone through several variations, including K-A-T-R, K-A-T-T-A-R, and G-U-T-T-U-R. It's also possible that it refers to a peninsula.
Never say you didn't learn a lot here tonight.
We have a small but
Next
mighty
in the
staff
audience.
at the Vail Symposium. We say teamwork makes the dream work, thanks to the online group. Rebecca.
Thanks very much for being here, all of you. My question is for Douglas. So you just returned from Qatar. What exactly were you doing there?
Well, I could tell you, but I'd have to. No, just kidding. It was actually an amazing time. I was there for kind of 3 different reasons. Sort of the day job, working in the world of finance, but it was also COP28 going on in Dubai, and it's actually interesting. The Qataris, it's a carbon economy. I mean, they are as wealthy as they are because of what they pump out of the ground, but they are unbelievable believers in climate change. And they are pumping, no pun intended, huge sums of money into climate research. It's the largest carbon recapture facility in the world, is outside of Doha. So I was there, to be a part of COP28. I was there, I sit on a couple of US boards still, so kind of representing those. And it was also what I don't know if they like this term. I know Professor Klaus does it, but they call it Davos in the desert. And it's the Doha Forum. And so I was there to take part in the Doha Forum as well.
Nicholas Vickling.
Microphone this way, remember?
Hello, sorry. Is that better?
Straight out.
Straight out.
That's good. That'll work.
Okay. Sort of like this. You've sort of answered my question a little bit. I was wondering why the climate conference hadn't been mentioned. I was also wondering why, particularly with the Gulf being in a place that would suffer massively from climate change. We've talked about war and conflict. That has a massive impact on climate change. There's fossil fuels being extracted, massive impact on climate change. Air conditioning in the Gulf going up all the time, as in Houston, massive effect on climate change. Desalinization, concrete, massive impacts on climate change. We've got if you look at the big cities on the map, apart from Riyadh, there's some big places like Doha that would suffer massively with the sea level rise. You said that they're pumping lots of money into this, but it needs more than that. It needs massive action unless the whole of the Gulf is going to end up with problems.
So what would the question be?
My question is, what on earth is Qatar doing with all this money when it's actually, it seems to be fiddling while Rome burns? What is your comment?
So I'll start and please jump in. They're practicing what they preach. I mean, one of the reasons I was there, if my CEO of my hedge fund is watching, yes, I was there representing our company, but I was also there on a board I sit on, which is a green tech cooling company that has the ability to lower energy consumption anywhere from 30 to 100%, which would be staggering. 70% of the Qatari's energy usage is for cooling. So you're absolutely right. The Qatari Investment Authority, which is the sovereign wealth fund of the nation, set up a separate independent green tech fund that is, yes, do they want returns, but that's secondary. The Emir has given them the guidance, like, you find me the next best thing, because when you go there, sea level is that floor, and here's my building. I mean, they are unbelievably susceptible to sea rise. They're very conscious of the fact that natural gas is what's powered their economy. But I genuinely believe you saw that, not to take sides, but the Emiratis danced a very difficult dance during COP28 in terms of their position on oil and how that would come into the final statements. The Qataris, they're not arrogant enough to think they could solve it all, but I can tell you they're not sitting there while Rome burns. They know they're in deep trouble, and they are trying to do everything they possibly can, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. And it's kind of refreshing to see. I'd like to see as much sort of energy, once again, no pun intended, that the Qataris are putting into it. I wish the US would be doing as much as they're trying to do.
Simon, your focus at the Washington Institute is in fact energy, one of your focus, energy in the Middle East.
Okay, except I'm going to unhelpfully say that my focus on energy is the current use of it, and I'm aware that climate change is a current challenge and a growing future challenge. I have no particularly good excuses or good answers to this other than research on it, and I'm rather take the view that at the end of where I am in my career means that this is going to be a bigger challenge for younger people entering my career rather than me.
But how genuine are the oil and gas-rich nations in the Gulf neighborhood when they even participate in a climate change conference like that?
Well, I was going to answer that in a different way, which is that it's not so much climate change they're interested in, they're interested in hosting major international events. And if and so, Qatar did the Soccer World Cup, and they do racing, car racing in these countries, and they do sports events, and there is their own, there is substantial competition between the Gulf countries on who is doing the biggest event. Dubai had an expo, and Saudi Arabia has manipulated a situation so that it will be doing a Soccer World Cup in the future as well. And that's what they're competing for this rather than competing to save the planet. So one of our challenges, or one of perhaps your challenges rather than mine, because I'm abrogating responsibility, is to devise a way of encouraging them to take a lead or a better effort on climate change. Because at the moment they say, actually we're spending so much on, it's not, the way the calculation is done, that is the league table of carbon nastiness relates to where the oil is used, i.e. Europe or the United States, rather than where the oil comes from.
Okay, next question.
The Palestinians have been living in horrendous conditions in Gaza for decades. How did this money that was meant for humanity get put into weapons and tunnels, and why is there not any resentment from what should have been humanitarian aid going into these tunnels we see in the missiles and rockets? And as a follow-up, is there hope for a potential third party in the Gulf to play a role in security, Egypt or Saudi Arabia, where Israel wouldn't have security control over Gaza, but neither would Hamas or another Palestinian government?
I didn't hear that.
I'm going to repeat the question just because of the echoey nature of the room. Is there a possibility, probably the key part of the question, is there a possibility when we're talking about security in Gaza, when the fighting, if and when the fighting ends, that another Middle East country could be the primary provider of that security, say Saudi Arabia?
So there are multiple money sources going into Gaza. The Qataris are one of them. The Iranians are a significant other one. Is there bleed off? I mean, there's bleed off in charities all over the world. Is there potential that some of the Qatari money has been used for illicit? I don't think anyone's crazy enough to think it couldn't have happened. But the majority of the money that has gone to fund the missiles and the tunnels and all that you've talked about was funneled via Iran. So that's just sort of an important distinction on that. to the part two of that question, I mean, to your earlier question to us about it, I mean, I think time will tell. I mean, something's got to give. I mean, you know, when I was over there, a reporter, well, it wasn't your former employer. I mean, someone who should have known better sort of asked me a question about it. And, you know, I said, are you talking 1948? Or are you talking, how far do you want to go back? Do you want to go back to King Richard III and the Crusades? You know, this is not, you know, going to be solved in, you know, I don't even go on Twitter anymore. What is it, 240 characters on the platform formerly known as Twitter? I mean, this challenge it's not going to be solved in 240 characters. I mean, people are deeply divided. You know, the attack in Israel, I mean, rip open a wound that had been simmering and is now, that genie is out of the bottle. I think as we saw after the attack on the Munich Olympics, the Israelis aren't going to stop until every single perpetrator of the attack in Israel is, well, let's just be honest, you know, is killed. I mean, they're not going to stop. And so until the dust settles around that, I don't know what, you know, the king of Jordan's not going to step in. He has his own Palestinian problem. You know, I think they're going to wait to see if the temperature can come down. And at that point, maybe it is Mohammed bin Salman who sees this as a great opportunity to show he's the next great leader in the region.
Yeah, I somehow doubt that the hopes for a decent level of Arab involvement in helping the future of Gaza will actually come through. I noted in the last day or so that the United States has announced a task force for the Red Sea to help cope with the Houthi attacks recently on merchant shipping. And you'll be pleased to know that Seychelles is in the task force, which caught my eye.
But no Arab nations is mentioned.
Well, Bahrain was involved, but presumably its contribution can be to give port facilities, because that's where the US Fifth Fleet is headquartered. But neither Saudi Arabia, which after all borders the Red Sea, nor the UAE, which has been active in Yemen activities over the recent years, wanted to be part of this.
Quick question. To what extent is there or is there not a relationship between Hezbollah and Qatar?
Repeat, please. To what extent?
Is there or is there not a relationship between Hezbollah and Qatar?
Oh, Hezbollah and Qatar, rather than Hamas and Qatar.
Precisely.
Is there a relationship, and to what degree does it exist, if at all?
I am unaware that there is a Hezbollah-Qatar relationship. Put simply, Hezbollah is a Shia Islamic force, and Qatar does favors for Sunnis rather than Shias, I think. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
I mean, what they have in common is their opposition to Israel.
Hezbollah looks to Iran for its support, its influence.
Right.
Thank you, gentlemen. All three of you have such a vast amount of knowledge and expertise and insight. I think an hour is not nearly enough. I could listen to you for days on this topic. It's really fascinating, and it's also vexing to us in terms of what we individually could do to contribute one way or the other. My question is twofold, and it's a more practical thing. With everything that you're talking about in the region and the interplay of relationships and conflicts, and the fact that these conflicts have existed for so long that there's no easy answer, I wonder what your thoughts are about leisure travel in the areas. For example, travel to Cairo or a cruise down the Nile. You're traveling there for business purposes and other purposes. What would your insights be? The State Department hasn't really changed their risk profile on that, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
Is it a good time or a bad time for Americans or
Will there ever
Westerners
be a
to
good
travel to the Middle East?
I guess I'll answer that in how I would answer, if my mom was asking. It saddens me to say it, but probably not. To Doha, absolutely. To Riyadh, absolutely. I would, if my mom called me and said, honey, I want to take a cruise down the Nile, I'd say you're crazy. And I think it's not the current situation, to be clear, in Gaza. It's Egypt's a mess right now. And when situations are a mess and you need help, it's very hard to get that. And it's tragic. I mean, the Middle East is an amazing place. I mean, Petra in Jordan is, if you haven't gone, it should be on your top 10 list. Would I travel to Jordan at the moment? Probably not. And it's, it's sad. But then again, I mean, turnaround's fair play. If you go to the websites of a lot of these countries, their travel warnings about going to New York City, to San Francisco, to Chicago in particular. And I have to say I kind of agree with them. We have our own situations here, but I'd hold off on the cruise just for a little bit. Caribbean's lovely this time of year.
Yeah, if you've got a European passport and you can make out that you're European rather than American, yeah, go. But if you're going to go as an American, probably not this year.
I spent many years myself going in and out of the Middle East, the Gulf countries and the North African countries and the nations surrounding Israel. But that was my job. I always knew that any old day, if somebody wanted to make an example of an American, particularly an American journalist, I might be the unlucky guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. These days, as you've seen since October 7th, there are not just anti-Israeli, but anti-American protests virtually all over the Middle East, in the primitive countries, in the sophisticated countries. And I would say there's a 99.9999% chance that you'd be just fine. But you don't want to be the one who's there on that wrong day in the wrong block of that place.
Thank you so much for all that you've shared with us tonight. Excuse me, but I think, Douglas, was it you that mentioned about women's rights in Qatar? How do you square that with a 2021 report from Human Rights Watch that showed concerns about the male guardianship rules that are embedded in many of the laws in Qatar in terms of women being able to marry without their guardians, whether it's a brother or a father? How do you square that? I mean, they're not quite there yet, from what I understand.
I mean, you raise a good point. I mean, they're cultural, traditional, sort of tribal things. I square that with women vote there, women drive cars there, women are at the highest levels of the government. Women are allowed to get divorced. So, is their culture through our eyes exactly perfect? Perhaps not. I do know that every, girl, and I use that word on purpose, in the country is given an education, paid for by the state from kindergarten all the way through college, which we're not doing in this country. So, are there, it's interesting, having a 17-year-old daughter and kind of talking through some of these issues is, times we have to be sort of sensitive to some of their own cultures that relate to kind of tribal customs. But it doesn't mean that they don't also have tremendous advantages that many young girls in this country don't have.
Simon, you're going to jump in.
Your question allows me to quote from something I wrote back in 2020, which was a study of potential succession in Saudi Arabia. I did one for Saudi Arabia as well. In Qatar, if Tamim suddenly died or something like that. And I had a list of who the people were to watch which included some women, and included Tamim's sister, Mayasa. And I wrote of that. Born in 1983, Mayasa is academically gifted and was educated at US and French universities. She has supposedly said, "If I were a man, I could be the Amir." And if you were to go to Qatar, and if you were lucky enough to be invited to a majlis in which you would probably be welcomed into the majlis, which is a salon in the evening, but you would qualify to get in there because they would essentially, without saying it, confer on you temporary male status, because you wouldn't see any of the wives or daughters or nieces of the family where you were visiting.
I attended a majlis in the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, the southern strip of Saudi Arabia, and there were no women to be seen. A lot of men with swords, no women to be seen. One more question, because we're running out of time, and it's coming from the live stream audience, I think.
I think we're at time. Go ahead and wrap us up, and then I'll give a close.
I could not hear you.
Yeah, we're at time. Go ahead.
We are out of time.
Okay.
Well, we're out of time, and I hope, as I think one of the guests said, I hope this will spur even more interest in a country like Qatar, because it plays a very important role. It has for the United States. It is now for the world, because this is the most dangerous neighborhood in the world. And Qatar is doing its best to throw a little cold water on the flames. Can they do it alone? Can they bring peace to the region? I think the answer is clearly no. But can they reduce the suffering of some people on both sides? Can they get more hostages out? Can they get more aid in? Can they play an important role? I think you've learned from these two experts that the answer is yes. So thank you to Douglas A. Smith and to Simon Henderson.
Thanks very much.
And this is Greg Dobbs.
Thank you.